Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here today. Today, I have a question for you. Is independence stifling your progress? If you are here and you can hear me right here in the chat, so I know who's out there listening, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what to expect in our conversation today. Independence might be one of the top qualities that gets you ahead in business today, but independence also has a shadow. Not only can it lead to burnout, overworking, and poor relationships at work, but also it can lead you to miss some of the biggest opportunities to expand and to grow your career. And this is doubly true if we're talking about team dynamics or shared company culture. So if you are a leader who tends to do things all by yourself, or you work in a culture of radical independence, you definitely need to listen to this session, and I'm glad that you are here. But also, if you think of yourself as a collaborative and connected leader, I challenge you to stick around because you may have fallen prey to some of the traps of thinking I'm not running independence as a shadow, but actually seeing that there is some independence under the surface that may be getting in your way. So we were going to both talk about some pretty intuitive and kind of known downsides of independence as well as the upsides, but we'll also look at some hidden shadows in our conversation today. In brief, we're going to cover the benefit, the surface shadow, and the hidden shadow of independence. I'll share a couple of client examples and case studies about how letting go of independence or changing their relationship with independence opens some big doors. And we'll give you a chance to reflect on one thing that you can do to disrupt your own habits and gain some new momentum. And if time allows, we'll do an embodied practice together at the end of our session. Great. It looks like there are a few of you here. Welcome. Thanks for being here. For those of you who don't know me very well yet, I'll share just a bit about myself before we dive in. So I'm LeeAnn Mallorie. I'm the founder and CEO of Guts and Grace Leadership, where we help women leaders who are struggling with challenges like burnout, invisibility, or disconnection from a deeper sense of purpose become resilient and recognized industry leaders. We do this specifically via unique methodology that focuses on mindset, intuition, and embodied wisdom, which actually underscores everything you do as a woman at work. You can learn more about this particular approach to leadership if you would like to go deeper. Let's see if I can get it up here now by watching our masterclass, which is available at gutsandgrace.com. This will give you a taste of how we think about leadership in our particular body of work. But in short, I'll just say I'm inviting you to step into, through these sessions, through this work, a new paradigm that may turn some of what you think about leadership on its head in, I hope, a good way. So if this sounds intriguing, you are in the right place. Let's go ahead and dive in together. Okay, so we're here today with a question: is independence stifling your progress? Now, this may already be a little bit of a counterintuitive question depending upon the culture you work in today and what you've already learned about leadership. In the US, at the time of this recording, we've just celebrated our Independence Day, July 4th. We are literally celebrating a virtue that this country was founded upon. So there's a lot of great things we can say about independence, and certainly independence is pervading in many ways in business culture today. But what we also know in this country and in other places, that in not so many ways it also may have a shadow side, that certainly our country has made mistakes that have caused harm or have caused us to fall into taking different groups of stakeholders less clearly into account, and that independence can lead to a certain kind of narrowness or overly goal focus or tunnel vision that might actually have some negative impacts on those around us. So there's a certain conversation that I think is important right now about leadership. What I have noticed is that interdependence, or being connected, is, let's say, more trendy in business than it was in the past, meaning probably more people who are watching this live that are in my current audience would say, oh yeah, totally, I agree with you. Independence is kind of a problem. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to have it fully embodied. So it's both great and it's a problem. And that's often what you're going to hear me talk about here at Guts and Grace. And what I think is interesting is, where are the nuances actually? What are the ways in which, one, there may be an upside and a downside to this particular value as we practice it? But also, number two, are there ways that we may have embodied it, let's say, that have a shadow, or are there ways that we think we've embodied something, but actually we're not all the way there? And that's actually part of what's wreaking havoc on our leadership and our success, and or our connection and our team building. So all of this is really fair game for our conversation today. Once again, if you are out there listening, actually, I want to invite you to put something in the chat. Like if you would be willing to put one word in the chat that you associate with the word independence, whether you're watching now or you're watching later, I think that can also help us kind of get a sense of what's in the field. So if you'd like, put one word in the chat that is a word you associate with the word independence, like first thought, best thought, what does it bring you to? And that can be a positive word, a negative word, something in between, a neutral word. What comes up for you? Okay, so let's talk about these three things. One, the benefits of independence. Two, the shadow. And number three, the hidden shadow that might be a different type of shadow than you're used to thinking about. So number one, what is great about independence? When we think about independence in a business or in a workplace context, we can see in many ways that it gets associated with progress. Independence, I'm doing something, I'm moving something forward. Maybe I'm setting a goal, I have a commitment, I'm taking a risk, for example. Often, one of the benefits of independence, when we're actually willing to and able to embody that value well, is a risk taking that leads to new ideas, that leads to certain things moving forward, that leads perhaps to innovation. And in particular, what I like to talk about is not getting stuck in the status quo. If everybody and anybody in a certain culture or a certain company or a certain organization has been doing things a certain way, the value of independence, well embodied, can actually be the thing that helps you to call a question or to disrupt something or to challenge the status quo. A certain level of sovereignty that might be tied to our embodiment of independence actually can prevent us, for example, from groupthink that takes us down a negative path, or can open a door to new possibilities that we hadn't actually been able to see. And if you think about this developmentally, certainly differentiation, at least in some cultures, from a parent is a critical developmental stage for a child to go through in their progress to adulthood. So there's something about this capacity to embody a strong, or at least a healthy sense of independence that of course does make a difference. I'll give you an example in the leadership realm. So not too long ago, I was working with a woman who was the next in line to become the executive director of her organization. And she had been stepping in for a founder who had been in the organization for a very long time. At that point in time, she actually had tended to be a person who was really taking care of the collective, who was really very much blending with the current culture. And that was going pretty well in her role as number two in the organization. When it was time for her to step into the leadership role, she actually was aware that she had seen possibilities for the organization that really were different than or above and beyond what her organization had already been willing to or able to take on. And in her stepping into this new role, she found, in fact, that her being able to wield the embodiment of independence, to in some ways unplug from, make different decisions than really own what she saw in terms of her vision for the next level, made a huge difference in being able to forward things. So whereas she actually was, let's say, not as practiced in independence as part of her leadership, being able to come into her own in that way made a huge difference. And I think we hear a lot of those kinds of stories often. So actually, when I thought about doing this session, I thought, do I tell this story? But it's useful to name both sides. So yes, being able to come more into our own, embody independence, embody individual decision making, take something in a new direction, is often a phase of development as a leader that actually really does make a difference for us to get ahead in our career or to move our organization somewhere new. And this particular client, I will say, because of what she'd already been practicing in terms of interconnectivity, listening, collective decision making, supporting what was already going on, it's almost like she wasn't at risk by going a little bit in the other direction of something that would take her to the dark side, if you will. So she was like already so collectively programmed and already so collaboratively programmed that bringing in more of this distinction of independence in how she moved through the world and how she made choices helped her to create some change that opened the possibility for her leadership. Okay, it's interesting. I'm now taking a look in the chat and I see we have the same word from two different people, which is independence equals strong. So I think that kind of relates actually to the story I just told, right? That there's something about I'm independent, I'm strong, I can make a decision, I can do something on my own, I have a sense of will, all of this that gets associated with independence, again, for better or for worse. Let's talk a little bit about the shadow side of all of this. So, again, certainly, if we take a look from the lens that I look through, let's say, at the United States of America as an example of radical independence and something that got created in that way, there's all of the progress and all of the things that we've done that have been great. And then whose toes did we step on in the process of that? Who did we leave out in the process of that? Who bore the cost of the choices we made and how we moved things forward? So one thing about independence, of course, is that there can be a cost for others if we're navigating in independence with blinders on, or in a way that actually doesn't track or doesn't take stock of the collective. So this is kind of one obvious version of the shadow side. And actually, I kind of said this earlier. I think in, let's say, the conscious leadership realm, in professional development training, in the HR world right now, it's like being able to talk about these things, challenge these things, look at the shadows of independence, talk about collaborative leadership. It's more trendy than it was maybe 20 years ago. I don't know, 10 years ago even. So I think saying there is a shadow of independence isn't so provocative, perhaps, as it would have been in the past, right? And nonetheless, we may still be operating inside of cultures where maybe we're saying that, but who gets promoted or who gets ahead are still the ones that are running the old independence paradigm. So I think both of these are worth considering. Okay, so what does it look like in practice? So one version, I would say, of the shadow of independence is that there are some of us who are wearing it kind of like a badge. I do it myself. I can figure things out. I will make the decision. This can be more like a narrowness of focus, an over committedness to goals that aren't willing to bend or waver when others may have input on them. And it can again lead to missing other people. It can lead to harm for others, but it can also lead to harm for ourselves. So as you may know, if you follow my work, I work a lot with women in leadership in the workplace. One of the biggest kind of downsides and cost of the shadow of independence often is burnout. That I'm doing so much myself that I'm in some ways I'm taking on everything, and I'm not leveraging the potential forces around me to take stuff off of my plate. Other aspects of the shadow can be things like missed opportunities, can be a liability risk if I'm the person who's running my business or running my department and I'm doing it all myself, and then kind of say in the business world, like I get hit by a bus, or like I have to take a day off and I get sick for a day, right? Maybe you don't have to be so dramatic, but that there's a liability risk if I'm holding everything, that when I'm not there, suddenly things may fall apart. But also there may be missed opportunities as well. So I will give you an example, working with an entrepreneur who is the founder of her business, but also in many ways becomes the bottleneck for the growth of her business. On one hand, she has the expertise. She can do many things herself. She's very skilled both in strategy and also in delivering things. So she can pretty much cover it all. And when she started the organization, it was really just her doing the work. Now she does have a team, but the habit and practice of being the one who's doing everything has stuck. So if you're watching out here and you relate to this, you might know that there are certain costs of that. For her in particular, one cost was her joy. That given that she was holding everything as the pie was expanding, as the business was growing, as their revenue was growing, at the same time, there was less and less time, since she was the person who was doing it all herself and independent in these ways, for making space for just her own aliveness, for her own thriving outside of the workplace. Even if she wasn't working, in some way she was still kind of holding all of that herself. As well, there were more missed opportunities, more and more, as the business grew, and her independence started to have more of a cost, not just for her own wellness, well-being, and sense of joy, but also for being able to increase what was happening in the business, because ultimately she needed more hands to be able to hold it. So what started to happen was a bigger increase in opportunities. And then at some point we saw that those things started to kind of fall away. There were fewer big fish showing up. There were fewer opportunities. And one way we could look at this is through the lens of, if I'm doing everything myself and suddenly I don't have the capacity, the opportunities, I either can't see them, I don't have the bandwidth to really pitch for them, look for them, show up for them if I'm the primary person developing the business. And or in some ways, maybe they just magnetize away because in fact, I'm not able to hold them anymore. So in working with this shadow or this thread of independence, what she found was that as she started to be more willing to rely on team members, be more willing to put team members in particular into key parts of roles that she was doing herself, taking bigger risks to let them not only be part of the doing of things, but part of the strategy or part of holding the bigger picture in different ways. That those opportunities started to circle back. And through her mentorship, she was able to really support them to expand the possibilities for the organization. So this is one kind of a shadow of independence that can play out, especially I would say with women leaders, but with any of us in the workplace, especially if we're running our own businesses. I'll give you another example. Another aspect of the shadow of independence is that we don't learn, or maybe we don't see our own blind spots. What does that look like? It can look like, let's say we might be missing good things and we might be missing bad things. There's actually kind of both that happen. So there are a lot of folks right now who are on the job hunt, who are out there looking for the next role. And one thing that I see commonly, so I'm thinking of a couple of particular people that I'm supporting right now, is that as we independently, because we feel like we should be able to land the next role, we should know how to do it. We know what our strengths and our skills are. We are going on the job hunt. We're doing the thing, but not necessarily opening our perspective enough to support in doing that is a certain kind of shadow of independence. And often when someone hires me, for example, to support them in the job search after having done it strongly, independently, committedly on their own for a long time, what we start to see is that often they've either been pitching small or they're missing certain aspects of their own blind spots about what they could be doing or what they need to take into account for the job that they're going after. So this sense of I've got to get it done, I've got to figure it out myself, I've got to find the role myself, I've got to make sense of what is needed for me without a lot of input, or that I should be able to do this because I'm senior enough in my career in particular. I tend to see it the more senior someone is, actually. That with the person I'm thinking of in particular, we started to kind of open the box through our collaborative conversations and then several other mentors that she got back in relationship through this process to allow in more input. And what it actually did was it changed her perspective on the roles that she should be pitching for. It opened the possibility that rather than just go after the same thing slightly next level that I could see when I was doing my own interpretation of it without a lot of additional input, that this possibility of, wow, maybe it's 3 levels up, or maybe it's actually a C-level position, for example, or maybe the combination of the skills I have fit together in this different way that's actually more resonant with the market right now, or more resonant with what I really care about, through doing it less independently and being willing to allow support in. So to recap, one version, wearing independence as a badge by doing things myself inside of the organization, not delegating, for example, being the person who gets things done, maybe not relying enough on or not bringing in another team member soon enough. But a second version is simply not opening to input in something even as simple and challenging as going on the job hunt. So opening yourself to more advisors, to more information, to being reflected, to receiving feedback, to being seen. Okay, I'll give you one more example. And again, I think these are somewhat traditional independence shadows. And then I'm going to share one that's a little bit more nuanced momentarily. But briefly, let's talk about a team example. So one thing that I tend to see is that if a senior leader has independence as a strong value that they wield well, they can tend to then hire other people around them who are playing the same way. So I was working with with a leader not too long ago who had a great vision for a high-performing, technically competent team. Through that process, she made some fairly unilateral decisions about new hires that would help to accomplish their specific technical goals. However, what she chose was people who are somewhat in her own likeness, similar to her in the particular way they got things done, wielded their independence, were able to make certain kinds of commitments, move things fast, and in doing that, missed to some extent taking into account how those people would work with, connect with, collaborate with, learn from, delegate to other people who are already on the team. Later in reflection, when a lot of counterproductive team dynamics started to show up, she kind of nodded a little bit and said, the truth is, I hired those people because they're like me. And we're all kind of running that same process. So we had a little bit of cleanup to do in terms of training them out of that level of independence and into a different kind of listening. But in some cases, actually, some of the team members had to be let go and replaced with people who were built a little differently to take into account both the needs for performance and the level of independence required to be able to get to the kinds of goals they were looking for, but also being able to balance it out with a certain kind of connectivity, or let's say people who are more like the glue in the organization that would make the culture work, not just make the final outcome on paper look like it would work. Okay, there's a poem that I really like. It's by David White. It's called Working Together. And I want to read just like a tiny snippet of it because I think it speaks to the level of, again, interdependence that's actually true about how things move and how we move through the world. Just offering this as a point of reflection for today. It goes like this: we shape ourselves to fit the world, and by the world are shaped again. The invisible and the visible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. Now, by the world, that could be someone else on my team. That could be spirit or some kind of invisible force. That could be by the collective culture. That could be many things. But what I appreciate about what the poet has to say is that there is a mutual shaping and shaping back that happens that in some ways is inevitable and, from his perspective at least, can produce something miraculous. And that is something that kind of gets lost when we're running only and primarily an independence value or independence paradigm. Now, as I mentioned earlier, also I think that conversation about interdependence matters, paying attention to the collective, is more trendy now, more the right thing to be in, in stewardship of at this point in time in leadership than it was a number of years ago. And what's great about that is that it's true, right? That there is something about being able and willing to take more stakeholders into account, being able to be tracking the collective, taking care of, attending the collective does really matter. And that we're bringing that back online in the kind of zeitgeist of business culture today is awesome. One of the downsides of that, I think, can be a hidden shadow, which is that if we're critiquers of independence, or we're, let's say, strong proponents of the collective or a different way, we sometimes can miss the ways that perhaps under the surface, because we've still operated inside of this entire system where independence has a very strong pull, perhaps we're missing ways that we're still running the shadow because we're so much on our soapbox about how it should be, how it could be, or even what we think we are being. And this is, I think, a really useful thing to pay attention to, especially if you are working in a nonprofit, if you're working inside of a movement or an organization where the social good is really at the fore, that sometimes, nonetheless, we can be all about these things that are not just being independent or that are meant to be about the collective, are meant to be more connected, but then nonetheless still running under the surface other paradigms. Just looking at my notes. So, for example, something that can look like is I'm highly stakeholder oriented, but also I'm protecting. Or I'm highly stakeholder oriented, really care about the collective, but also some part of me, knowingly or unknowingly, has a little bit of a savior thing going on. And so, with all of that, nonetheless, I need to be the person who's going to save us all or make all of this work or whatever. And these are things that aren't easy to look at. They're not easy to talk about. They're not really typically things that we're super aware of if we are running these kinds of shadow programs. So I'm naming them with the possibility to invite you to consider, well, are there ways, even if I think, I'm the one that's got something else down, are there ways that I might be running something under the surface or a little bit more subtle? Another version of this can be something like, because I care so much, about the team, because I care so much about the people who work for me or about the collective, I'm doing extra work to kind of hold it all together or not to burden them or because I want to make it easier on them. These kinds of things can be part of that type of a shadow. Anyway, I'm doing it by myself, right? It's like it's just tucked into a different conversation. I actually have a number of organizations that I'm working with that have versions of this that might be relevant right now. And for the sake of their privacy, I think what I'm going to do actually is share a little bit of my own example instead, because I think it can point to what's happening in the collective. I actually think this particular shadow and transforming or healing something about this has a lot of potential for what needs to happen in businesses evolving in the next maybe half a year to a year to couple of years. So in my own example, I run a fairly small organization in terms of team and who actually works for us, with a group of stakeholders that are much broader than our team, certainly a pretty broad client base, also the people who are perhaps other experts or collaborators, different people. So in a way, our organization is a little bit like a collaborative, although it is run as a fairly small business. And one of the things that's been true about me in this work for a long time is that I can see the way the culture of my business needs to evolve. I can see the possibility for something changing, but I care so much about this collective that I'm stewarding that I don't want to burden it. And I don't necessarily want them to have to know about everything that's difficult about what we're trying to do behind the surface. What that has led to at different moments is a sense of the energy or something about the culture, something about the system needs to change, but there are too few of us holding that to really actually be able to make the change happen. So if you look, for example, at psychological literature on mental health and on trauma healing, you see there's many folks who have said things like, really, we can only heal in community. Really, you can only move the energy of something fairly big with a fairly big group of people. And since the energy of the system, although the team is small, the energy of the system is fairly big, I started to see the ways that I probably actually can't open the door to what needs to change and evolve in my organization without being out to a broader group of stakeholders, even if they're not directly responsible for it or directly connected. Recently, I had the opportunity to share some of this with a group of clients and other stakeholders. And while it felt risky, it actually also felt like it opened the door for a lot of new ideas, interesting potential types of support to come through that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And although I teach this type of work, it took me a long time to actually take that risk. So offering this is a possibility if you think about your own organization, how you operate with the collective, and are there perhaps things that if you involved, for example, a broader group, would make a difference to be able to move the collective, maybe change the culture or open a new product or service or do something that you want to do, where it seems a little counterintuitive, but actually that could be a possibility. A couple other examples of this type of more subtle or more hidden shadow. Some of us maybe are, again, programmed to care about, to take care of, to tend the whole collective, but perhaps we're doing it in such a way that's highly controlling or super strategic and making sure all of the details and nuances are down. So while I'm tending everybody, I'm still doing it in such a way that I'm the one in charge or I'm the one that has to make sure it's okay. Another version, fairly classic in certain family systems. Maybe I care so much about my family or I'm so connected to and plugged into this group of people that I won't speak my needs, or I'll go around the side to get them met, or I'll be acting like I don't have any, but be a little bit resentful because I haven't actually told you what I need. So it's a bit of a personal or a side kind of example. Okay, so the benefits of independence, the kind of blatant or obvious potential shadows, and then some of these more hidden or more subtle versions of shadows that can show up in those who are more the critiquers of independence and taking a stand for something different. That all being said, I invite you to take a moment and just feel for yourself. What of this, if anything, resonates? Do I see myself in any of this? If you would like, if you have a journal or a notebook, something to take notes on, I'll give you just a couple of questions to reflect on. The first one is, where are you on the independence or something else spectrum? Do you tend to be strong, do it yourself, really identify that way? Or do you tend to be more collaborative, more collective, more connected, tend the group? And the second question is, regardless of where you're at on that spectrum as you self-identify, are there any shadows or even hidden shadows in how you do independence, even if you see yourself more on the I'm a collaborative leader side? Maybe something about one of my examples struck you, or maybe it's not something I named, but nonetheless, you can see it in yourself. And then the next question is there one step you could take, having considered this, having heard what got shared today, that might open up the flow of momentum or progress for you right now, that might perhaps disrupt one of these habits or challenge this part of yourself? There's no wrong answer here about what to do next, except to do nothing if you see something. So often I would say the magic happens in action. Based on what you've considered, perhaps what you've heard, what you've been reflecting on here, I want to invite you to, post completing watching this recording or watching it with us live, to choose something you want to do, try on, interrupt. Maybe it's a conversation you want to have. Maybe it's what I would call a bold action, like I'm going to do this one time, one thing that I would never risk doing before, but I think it could change the paradigm for me or open a door. Or it could be more like a practice every day. When I'm in these types of situations, I'm going to try doing X instead of Y that I used to do. So if there's something like that, I invite you to go ahead and take a note for yourself about that. If you feel called to share something in the chat, you're welcome to do that too. But I know that can also sometimes be vulnerable. So feel free, if you feel to take the risk, to put something you want to practice or an insight or a realization in the chat as well for sharing and accountability. And if this speaks to you and you'd like to go deeper, or you're not sure, given what you're seeing here, what you'd like to practice, I invite you to book a discovery call. So typically here at Guts and Grace, we make some time available for leaders who want to create more of a plan or a strategy around how they most need to grow. And if you've watched one of these lives, we can really focus on your leadership in general, but we can also hone in on the specific topic or conversation about independence and how that may be wreaking havoc on or opening doors in your leadership. So if you feel called to go a little deeper, I'd be delighted to talk to you. Also, we shared already at the beginning the masterclass, which you're welcome to check out. So gutsandgrace.com/apply for a discovery call or /masterclass if you'd like to join us to go deeper in that way. As I mentioned at the beginning, a big part of what we do at Guts and Grace really is to help women leaders in particular advance their leadership and grow into more versatile, resilient, influential, and recognized leaders. So it's a huge part of what we're doing to kind of uncover the ways we've embodied old paradigms that don't totally serve us, or take the lid off of past strategies that might need to get upgraded in order to be able to fully lead at this moment in time. So if you have been here, I want to thank you for taking the time to be in this particular reflection with me. If it spoke to you, feel free to forward it to someone else or like or share. And actually, we'll go ahead and end the class in a moment with a brief centering practice. So if you'd like to stick around for a couple minutes of practice, this practice will be dedicated to releasing the shadow parts of independence and really finding ourselves grounded in our own bodies to be able to lead well at this time. Okay. All right, so if you'd like to join me in practice, you're welcome to sit or stand. I'm just going to push my chair back a little bit. So if you are sitting, I invite you, if you'd like, to sit more on the edge of your seat so you have kind of access to your own body and sensations. If you'd like to stand, you're welcome to stand to feel your whole body. And I invite you to, first of all, set an intention. Whatever you've heard here, does it inspire you to want to risk something different, to grow in your leadership in some way? If so, Set an intention about that. Here's what I see in myself. Here's what I'd like to change. Here's who I'm becoming. Here's a new experiment I'd like to be in. And then let that go and bring your awareness to the sensations in your own body. So notice one thing that you can feel. Maybe you feel your breath rising and falling. Maybe you feel someplace that feels tight or loose. Maybe you notice you're in a particular mood right now, having heard all of that. Or if you're just joining us late, then maybe you're just coming in the mood. All right, and as we come into relationship with our own bodies, I invite you to first feel the length of your spine. Let your spine get long and tall so that you're not collapsing, leaning forward, but also not trying too hard to reach, just sort of a settled length in your spine. And as you do that, sensing your own sovereignty, feeling into your own dignity, and perhaps having a visceral or embodied sense of how independence, how standing for something, how doing something on your own, perhaps how seeing the future in your own way has served you. Who I am, what it be, the actions I've taken on my own, in my way, have mattered, have served. And let yourself appreciate yourself for that. In whatever context, in whatever ways it's true. And as you appreciate, feel the resonance of that, the power of that in your body. And then on your next breath, start shifting your attention to what we'll call the width, so the side to side of you. And imagine from your insides and that length of your spine, you're expanding and opening outward. So you don't need to move your hands per se, I'm just showing you, but just feeling out to the edges of your own body, feeling the sides of your arms, sides of your hips, sides of your legs, tips of your ears, pinky toes, widening your peripheral vision, so that almost you can imagine if you were standing now in a room and there were others on this session, or maybe on your team, you can imagine standing with you. Maybe you're all standing together in a line facing forward, and that you're connected, that you're not just doing it alone, that there is a broader perspective here. And as you widen your periphery like that, you can actually imagine letting some of what you're holding, some of what you do hold, some of the anything about that you've accomplished on your own, like letting the sensation or the energy of it move out to the sides, so that it's being held not just by you, even if there's no one really standing there right now, just in your mind's eye and in the actual expansion of your body and your wider vision, letting it be shared. Okay. Maybe it feels scary. Maybe it feels lighter. At least, hopefully, you can have a sense of that broadening or that widening out or that connecting, that not being alone. So as you imagine, sense, or feel yourself here in this line with others next to you, I invite you for just a moment to feel your back. And same thing, kind of opening your perspective, your periphery out to the back. And here, if you want, you can also sense, feel, or imagine others at your back. This could be those who've helped you in the past or are currently at your back helping. Could be your lineage, your ancestors, parts of your history, old mentors, past friends, teachers, the shoulders of the giants you've been standing upon. So, wow, I'm not alone in that way either. My past also has support. what's behind where I've come from. And then last but not least, for now, bring your awareness to the front of your body and allow the front to feel open, expanded from your own physical body out forward. And in this moment, you can feel, sense, imagine those you serve or will serve. Here's who my actions, my generosity, the things that I and we are up to are serving. And sense that that's not really solo either. The group of stakeholders, the people that the mission of your organization or your own personal mission are about, future generations. Good. So in that, I invite you to sense the original line of your own dignity, your own uprightness, your own sovereignty, perhaps your own independence, to use this word, and then the much broader picture of what else and who else is around, and how different it feels perhaps to hold it with them, not just by yourself for them. Awesome. If there's one intention you want to set for the rest of your day, or these next couple of weeks, given what came up today, that you want to anchor in this moment from this place of center, feel free to do that. And let the decision of that, the choice of that, perhaps the energetic of that, shape your presence further. If that's what I'm choosing, if that's what I want to practice, if that's what I'm risking or willing to try on, how do I organize myself for that? What changes, if anything, in me? Okay, take a big deep breath, a big exhale, and whatever of that feels good to you still, I'm inviting you to take it with you. As we close, I want to affirm that anything you learned, realized, integrated, or practiced here goes on to serve the highest good in your life, in your leadership, and on your team. And that what you need to remember, you will remember, and that any practice you choose to engage in from here forward bears fruit. I would love to keep in touch. If you'd like to, please be in touch. And otherwise, I wish you a great rest of your day. If you are here and you'd like to put something in the chat to say goodbye or what you learned or close out, feel free to do that. Thank you all.